Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. I've been using the Alienware AW3423DW for about 2 years now, ever since I published my review of this monitor back in April of 2022. So it's time for an update exploring how this QD-OLED ultrawide has been going over the last 2 years as my primary daily driver gaming monitor. Have any of the issues I had initially improved? Is there more burn-in with this display now than a year ago? Plenty of stuff to uncover in this one. Before getting into all the details, a quick refresher on how I've been using the AW3423DW in case you missed my 1-year update. In my studio here, I have two main PC setups. I've got a workstation, which is currently using the MSI MPG321URX QD-OLED, as seen in my burn-in update videos, and a gaming rig which uses the AW3423DW. Each system is dedicated to its task, so the components of the PC and the monitor can be tailored to that setup. While I have been using this Alienware monitor primarily for gaming, that's not the only thing I've been doing on it. I'd say it's been about a 70-30 split between gaming and web browsing, so 70% of the time gaming, 30% of the time browsing the web, watching YouTube videos in a split screen mode, managing my Steam library, and so on. I'm not the biggest gamer going around, but across the last 2 years, I've averaged about 400 hours of gaming per year, a little less in year 1 and a bit more in the past 12 months. Add in the extra time doing web browsing and so on, and I've used this Alienware monitor for between 1100 and 1300 total hours so far. That is absolutely on the low side considering how other people may use a display like this, especially if it's a work monitor. For example, 4 hours of use per day over 365 days comes out to about 1500 hours of use, which is more than the estimated time I've used the AW3423DW for. But this is based on my experience, and I'm sure there will also be people with similar usage patterns to me. I also have my gaming PC set up in a way that's optimized for PC OLED use, as I would recommend anyone does. This means in Windows, I'm using the dark mode, and I've set the display to sleep after 5 minutes of inactivity. Originally, I had the taskbar set to minimize, but I ended up finding that pretty annoying and changed that within the last year. I haven't been trying to punish my monitor, I've been trying to use it in a realistic way, but I do have it set to 200 nits for SDR content, which is 80% of what the monitor can do best case. In the last update a year ago, I noticed some very faint signs of burn-in on my AW3423DW that is most likely due to side-by-side app usage. There was an extremely difficult to see faint vertical line down the center of the screen that corresponded to the edges of apps when used in a side-by-side configuration, and this line was most noticeable when viewing mid-grays in the RGB 50 range or so. Despite seeing this faint line in full-screen uniform test patterns, practically speaking, I hadn't really experienced burn-in at all. When browsing the web, playing games, watching videos, or using the monitor normally, there were no noticeable burn-in artifacts that impacted the experience whatsoever. It was a little concerning to see faint burn-in effects in some circumstances after such a small amount of usage. I estimated around 500 hours of total usage to that point, and probably just a few hundred hours using side-by-side apps, but realistically it didn't impact my usage of the monitor at all. So what has changed on the burn-in front after another year of usage and now total usage of around 1100 to 1300 hours? Not much. The amount of burn-in I'm seeing on the AW3423DW is pretty much identical to what I saw a year ago, with the faint vertical line still visible, but not any more visible than what I saw previously. It still has virtually no impact on actual monitor usage, and it's good to see things haven't gotten any worse. Now, I'm still within the 3-year warranty period that Alienware states on their website, which includes burn-in coverage, so it makes sense that I'm not seeing any burn-in that has an impact on real-world usage. I'm using the monitor normally, I've configured it in a sensible way to protect the OLED panel, I'm mostly doing content consumption, and Dell would very likely know that the display is likely to last at least 3 years in that sort of configuration, which is why they would provide that level of burn-in warranty. Will burn-in accelerate over the next year or so and become problematic for content consumption? Well, based on my usage patterns and what I've seen so far, I doubt it. Even if this faint line I'm seeing was twice or 3 times as visible in test patterns, it probably still wouldn't have a huge impact on typical day-to-day usage, and it's unlikely to get that bad that quickly. I'd definitely rather not see any signs of burn-in, but for now things are looking reasonable in the first few years. The next thing to tackle after 2 years is the firmware situation with the AW3423DW. As one of the first buyers of this product and effectively an early adopter, I was shipped a unit with firmware version M0B101. After several months, Dell started shipping units with a newer firmware version, M0B102, that addressed several bugs I found with the initial firmware. However, as the display did not officially support firmware updates at the time, I was unable to install that firmware and benefit from the improvements without sending the entire unit back to Dell, which I didn't want to do and quite frankly is a huge pain. To make matters worse, when I asked Dell about firmware updates for this monitor, not only did a representative say it wasn't possible for consumers to update this product, but that most monitors actually don't need firmware updates, a position I strongly disagree with. Many monitors I've tested, especially those with high-end features and HDR capabilities, actually do need firmware updates to correct small bugs with the original shipping firmware, improve compatibility with certain configurations that the manufacturer might not have been able to test at the time, or to correct bad performance in tuning. It turns out what Dell told me, and told consumers to begin with, actually wasn't true. Users can update the AW3423DW, and indeed Dell provided a user firmware update tool in December of 2023. This tool is very unusual as it flashes the G-Sync module over a DisplayPort connection rather than USB like most other monitors, as the G-Sync module doesn't support USB input. It's a very similar process to updating the ASUS PG27AQN with its firmware update introducing support for ULMB2. Anyway, with this firmware update, I was able to flash firmware M0B106 on my monitor, which brought with it several improvements. The fan behavior is now largely fixed, so the internal cooling fan doesn't ramp up and down as much and doesn't stay active when the display is in standby mode. This brings the AW3423DW in line with other QD-OLED displays that have active cooling, which are largely silent during normal usage and run the fan at a consistent slow speed. I also saw improvements to input latency, although this really wasn't a big deal for me to begin with. This monitor had a slightly slower processing delay than other similar monitors initially. Now it's more in the normal range. The initial M0B101 firmware also had issues with the OLED care features. Occasionally, the monitor would not actually run these features in the standby mode, and at other times the monitor would pop up with a notification to run the pixel refresh after unusually short periods of time, like straight after turning the monitor on from standby. In the latest firmware, M0B106, I'd say this has only been partially fixed. At least with my unit, the monitor seems to now consistently run the pixel refresh during standby, which can be seen as the monitor's power LED switches to green and starts running the process when it enters standby. So that's a good sign, and that will hopefully help slow the progression of burn-in, though it wouldn't have had much of an impact up to this point as I only installed the firmware update a few months ago, so most of my usage was on the original firmware. However, I do still on occasion get pop-up messages saying I should run the pixel refresher immediately after turning the monitor on, which is a bit annoying. I was hoping this firmware update would resolve this, and it does seem to happen less often, but it still happens when realistically it should never pop up after standby, as the pixel refresh should run in standby, meaning I don't need to then run it again straight away. So the firmware situation is certainly better than it was, and it's good to see Dell found a solution to actually provide user upgradable firmware on a monitor that initially appeared not to support it. I'm not sure whether it will receive any further updates from here, but the position the monitor is in now is much more in line with other QD-OLED ultrawides I've tested. Good news for early adopters that can miss out on stuff by purchasing the very first model, but it's not a total full fix for a lot of the issues that I was seeing, and ideally I'd like to see a further firmware update, maybe turn down some of those notifications that we see for the pixel refresh. Most of the other annoyances and flaws I mentioned in my Year 1 update are still the case today. No HDMI 2.1 support here, relatively low SDR brightness, the non-standard sub-pixel layout hurting text quality, and the poor screen coding and composition that has issues in brighter environments. The first two of those issues don't impact me on a day-to-day basis, but the sub-pixel layout and screen composition I certainly would like to see improved on a future model, especially now that we have newer QD-OLEDs with small improvements in both areas. What we're seeing from newer panels probably wouldn't get me to upgrade, but if ambient light reflectivity could be reduced drastically in a newer generation, that would interest me for sure. In general though, I continue to enjoy using the Alienware AW3423DW as my daily driver gaming monitor. I've played plenty more games since the last update, and in particular I've enjoyed some of the latest spectacular single player games on this thing that look great in the HDR mode, such as Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty and Alan Wake 2. More and more games are including decent HDR modes at launch, and there's also newer tools to add in HDR to games that don't officially support it, like Nvidia's RTX HDR. I've also seen the launch of many newer OLED monitors, and there's nothing so far that would tempt me to purchase a new display and change over, although I am starting to see the benefits of some aspects to newer products. For example, the latest 4K QD-OLED gaming monitors have a higher refresh rate, 240Hz versus 175Hz, and a higher pixel density, 140 ppi versus 110 ppi, plus an updated subpixel structure. When using my 4K 240Hz QD-OLED for productivity work, I can definitely feel the monitor is faster and smoother than my ultra-wide QD-OLED at 175Hz, so a higher refresh rate would be nice. A better pixel density, perhaps a 4K class resolution in an ultra-wide format, would also go a long way to improving text quality, and when using the latest 4K OLEDs, it's clear that they have better text clarity than the original QD-OLED panels. But as a fan of ultra-wide gaming, there hasn't been an update to that format that brings enough improvements to get me to upgrade. For example, we got 49-inch QD-OLED ultra-wides like the Samsung Odyssey OLED G9 with its 5120x1440 resolution and second generation QD-OLED tech. I like what those panels bring, especially the Samsung model at 240Hz, but I'm not sure the extreme width on offer is what I'm after. I quite like the 34-inch size and 21:9 aspect ratio. There has also been the release of new WOLED panels in 2024 that are available in both a 34 and 39-inch size. But I don't think the WOLED panels are better than the QD-OLED panels we already have. The subpixel structure of WOLED with RWBG produces inferior text quality at this pixel density, and I much prefer the 1800R curvature of the QD-OLEDs than the aggressive 800R curvature you get with WOLED. Then there's other considerations like the matte screen coating and brightness differences, as well as the very high price tags of current WOLED offerings, though the WOLEDs do provide 240Hz, which is a definite advantage. What I'd really like to see is a 39-inch QD-OLED ultra-wide panel with a 5120x2160 resolution, 1800R curvature, 240Hz or higher refresh rate, and ideally improvements to screen composition. That would give me the text clarity of the latest 32-inch 4K OLEDs, a larger screen size in the same 21:9 aspect ratio, which I think would be a great immersive format for gaming, and it would bring a higher refresh rate. That set of benefits would have me seriously considering an upgrade just 2 or 3 years after purchasing an AW3423DW. Until then, the AW3423DW will continue to serve me well, and I don't regret purchasing one. Well, I mean, I had to buy one to review it for the channel, and that was a good decision in itself, but if I bought it purely for personal use, I still wouldn't regret handing over my hard-earned money for it. Will I still be using it in a year from now, bringing me up to the 3-year mark? I think there's a very good chance I will be, unless something spectacular gets released that would pull me across. But looking at the OLED panel roadmaps, there's nothing that's really jumping out to me that is a potential for me to switch across. I know there's a lot more 16:9 format monitors, which is great, especially for people that love that format, but for ultra-wides, it's a wait and see sort of proposition. Anyway, that's it for this 2-year update using the Alienware AW3423DW. If you do appreciate these updates, then consider subscribing to get more of them in your inbox, and also giving this video a like. We also have our Patreon and Float Plan accounts down below, so if you want to support this channel directly, that's a good way to do so. Check down there and you'll gain access to some cool benefits like our Discord community and so on. Also, if you're after updates from the QD-OLED 4K side of things, we will have a burn-in update on the channel very shortly, covering 3 months of usage with that particular monitor. So we'll look at everything there as well. So yeah, good to be subscribed so that you don't miss out on that one. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.